Arlie Hochschild from California is our guest speaker for today. Professor Hochschild is Professor Emerita at the University of California at Berkeley. She's a well-known sociologist and widely regarded as the founder of the sociology of emotions. In her probably most famous book, The Managed Heart, which has attained the status of a classic in the profession, she turned the spotlight onto the commercialization of emotions of employees, mostly flight attendants and debt collectors, by their employers. The ability to manage and utilize one's emotions becomes part of the basic configuration of employees who in turn perform better and more profitable for the company, something that she calls emotional labor. In her subsequent book, The Second Shift, which, by the way, is a required reading in almost all courses on feminist sociology, she discusses the increasing emotional requirements through changes in occupations and careers and the effects of these changes. The method of in-depth interviews to get at the deep-seating emotions that underlie much of our actions, she applied also in her recent book, Strangers in Their Own Land, in which she tries to grapple with the contradictions surrounding the surging success of Donald Trump. She wants to tell a deep story, which is, and I quote from her book, "It's the story feelings tell in the language of symbols. It removes judgment. It removes facts. It tells us how things feel." End of quote. According to Professor Hochschild, we don't understand anyone's politics without it. The deep story behind the success of Trump is the frustration stemming from the stalled American dream. As she writes, and I quote again, "On the one hand, the national ideal and promise at the brow of the hill was the American dream, which is to say progress. On the other hand, it had become hard to progress." End of quote. If one had to put her method in just one word, I guess it would be empathy. The ability to understand the emotional conditions of the actors involved, an understanding which is indispensable if one wants to make sense of the contradictions between life situations, interests, and ideology. The book is an attempt to reach out to those across the aisle to find a common ground for discussions and solutions to problems of an increasingly divided country. At this point, I'll stop and hand the microphone over. Professor Hochschild, the floor is yours. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so very much, Luke-Paul. That's very generous. I'm delighted to be here and to talk to you in Europe and see if we can put our heads together on how to think and act our way out of the dilemma that I think we all face. In fact, around the world, there has been a move toward right-wing populism that has caught many of us by surprise, and we need to stop, back up, reflect, and take this very seriously. So the whole idea of this conference is a wonderful one, and I really applaud it. I'd like to try and do 4 things today, just for 40 minutes, and then open it out to questions and discussion. I'd like to first say where we are in the United States today, then second, how we got there, and then to focus on what the underlying factors are for us to look at. And briefly, so what can we do? Where do we go from here? Today, we have a Democratic president who believes in a democracy. And I shouldn't have to say a thing like that, but I do have to say a thing like that because the last president we had, Donald J. Trump, did not really believe in democracy. He is the charismatic American face of populism. So I want to just say that last January 6th, he egged on supporters to storm the Capitol building. And this is an extraordinary event in American history. It's what things can come to. And if he'd been smarter about it, it's a very frightening, serious event not to be passed over. And 46.8% of American voters in 2020, after knowing who Donald Trump was, after 4 years of exposure to the rhetoric, voted for Donald Trump. And after the break-in on January 6th into the Capitol of the United States, approval of Donald Trump remained among Republicans. Something like 2/3 of Republicans after this event still support him. So what's happened is that now Republican in the United States, last stage where we are today, in the United States, most state legislatures in the 50 states that make up our country are controlled by Republicans, those chambers in each state, and many of them are now trying to restrict voting. Okay, so there are, especially in swing states, struggles going on to make it harder for people to vote. They would have to go, there are only certain times they could do it, they would have to show their identity, and so on. So that's where we are today. Now, so that raises the question of how the United States got into this situation. And in 2011, I began having a sense that the right wing was growing. There was no Donald Trump on the scene. It was, but there was in 2011 already something called the Tea Party on the right that didn't believe in big government, and didn't believe in regulating anything, and really wanted to reduce the size of the federal government, didn't think it did anything good. And I wondered, since the government, good government seems like a solution to a lot of the problems, not only solution, but an important part of a solution to a good society, that troubled me. And so back then, I left this very democratic state of California and went on repeated trips over 5 years to the heartland of the most conservative part of the country. This was in the South, a state called Louisiana, that is built around the oil industry in southern Louisiana, a town called Lake Charles. And I hung out with people and got to know a lot of people over a long period of time, and wrote a book called Strangers in Their Own Land, feeling a little like a stranger in that land, of course. And so what was going on then? I'd like to divide talking about it in two kinds of ways. The first kind of way, I'd like to kind of tell a story as it changed through time. And then I'd like to back up and say what's animating that story, what's underneath it. So the story as it changed through time is that throughout the South of America, in America, but in Louisiana, about half of the general population thought the Tea Party was was wonderful. And so those I interviewed said that when I talked to them, I'd say, well, what is the Tea Party about? And they would say, well, we're not happy with America. And I would say, well, what are you not happy about? Well, we think the government's spending too much money. Okay, that was the issue, the budget. This issue was totally to disappear. 5 years later, I went back, they didn't say a thing about the money. So that was the surface issue. And then they would tell me how unhappy they were. And they just, they would say things. Just to give you a sense of what it's like to do that field work, I would go and say, hi, I'm Arlie Hochschild. I teach sociology at UC Berkeley. I'm an open book. I'm not one of you. I come from the other side in a way, but I'm really curious about you because I'm worried about this divide in our country, and I'd like to get to know you. And you would be doing an enormous favor for me just to tell you what you believe and why, how you grew up. And they would say back to me, well, we think we're worried about this divide too, but that's because you people don't understand us. And you people look down on us, you coastal people, you Democrats, you look down on us. You think we're the flyover state. You think we're uneducated. You think we're backward. You think we're racist. And you think we're prejudiced. And you think we're fat. So I would say, okay, so the reason I'm here is to correct the mistakes. And so that was how this journey began. And it all, in a way, after I listened and listened, came down to what I came to call the deep story. Excuse me. And the deep story is like a dream. It's what you believe to be true. And it's like Luftpold was saying, you take facts out of the deep story. It's just what feels true about a salient situation. And you tell it as you would a metaphor or a dream. You're standing in line. And at the top of the mountain is the American dream. So you're as if in a pilgrimage to the top of the mountain, the American dream. But the line hasn't moved. I talked to people who hadn't had a raise for 20 years, felt they were moving backwards. So you're in this line and the people ahead of you are moving ahead. And you feel about yourself, if you are this right-wing person, I deserve to be in the place in line that I am. I'm not looking back, I'm just looking forward to the people ahead of me. And I feel like I'm obeying the rules. I've worked hard, I'm deserving. And in the next moment of the right-wing deep story, someone's cutting ahead of you. Now, who would that be? That would be an African-American or a woman who, through affirmative action programs legislated by the federal government, you think is taking, is moving ahead of you. And the African-American, the woman, are now being given opportunities that had been reserved for whites and for men. Another moment of the deep story on the right wing is others are cutting ahead. well-paid public sector workers are cutting ahead of you. And environmental, even the animals like the Louisiana state bird, which became extinct because of vast pollution that the oil industry had caused. Well, these regulators were, environmental regulators were coming in and they're cutting jobs, it was felt. So they're cutting ahead. All of these line cutters, another moment of the right-wing deep story. There is Barack Obama, who seems to be waving to the line cutters. Oh, that's who this federal government is for. It's for these line cutters. And me, I'm forgotten. And, in final moment of the right-wing deep story, someone ahead of you in line, maybe a professor, maybe someone from the coast, some big city, some contemptuous, bet higher than you person would turn around and say, you redneck, you hillbilly, and laugh in contempt at you. And that was the final thing. You are now a stranger in your own land and without connection to a government that represents you. That's the right-wing deep story. And I felt it underlay everything they said. There are different versions of this in the country as you go around, but it's a story of loss and shame. And I'll come back to that. And it's, it led to kind of the first version of a journey that then took place. Because at that moment, and I attended a primary rally in 2016 of Donald Trump, and I felt that discontent that was already there before Trump, suddenly he had lit a match, and people, I went in a bus with a Tea Party woman and to this rally, and there were thousands of people, and they were saying to each other, oh, look how many of us there are. This is what Durkheim kind of says, the point of any leader is to get the followers together. And that was a mobilization, a moment of mobilization. And then in further chapters of this deep story, Trump as the charismatic leader and critic of the government, I will be the one he in a way wanted to be. His whole person, one person could be a government. He kind of, and people would say, yes, you need a big personality to lead a country. They didn't think that was wrong. And so in another kind of chapter of this deep story, Trump says to his followers, I am you and you are me. I am your voice. We are one. I love you, you love me. Chapter 2 of this deep story, after this forging that happens in any charismatic leader does this. Any charismatic leader says, I don't need other sources of authority. I don't need to know what's true. I am the source of authority and truth. And he's now bound himself to people who were dissatisfied to begin with. He's mobilized them now. And then in this, we'll say, third chapter, he says, I am suffering for you. Okay. And against great enemies. I am suffering for you against onerous government. I am suffering for you against the treasonous mainstream press that's criticizing me all the time. I am suffering for you against the Democratic Party. And all my enemies, I am doing battle with them for you. And in a way, it's a beatification of Donald Trump. He's trying to present himself as a religious figure who suffers for others. I know it sounds incredible to many people when I advance this guess, but I think it's true. And I've heard people say, you know, it's like Christ has come for us. So in a final stage of this deep story, the next to last chapter, Donald Trump, charismatic populist leader, says, now you suffer for me. It's your turn to step forward. You come to Washington. You walk down Pennsylvania Avenue. Come in your uniforms. If you carry guns, okay. And come to the Capitol building and protest what is a, quote, stolen election. So that was a conflagration. The attack failed. It was largely actually cultural. Here we are, and the picture was of heavily armed men and white men, blue collar men mainly. So this phase of you suffer for me kind of led to Trump's disappearance, and those who participated in this attack on the Capitol now saw FBI signs up looking for so-and-so, reward if you help us trace them down. They became criminalized in a way. The people who had felt like the real patriots, we're here in Washington to say the election's been stolen, Donald Trump told us so. We're the Democrats, we're the people that believe in democracy, we're defending it, we're doing what our savior has told us to do. And now the FBI signs are looking for us. So from hero to villain, and it's very confusing. And on the other hand, Donald Trump does not succeed. He disappears. He doesn't pardon them. He gives 77 pardons, and none of them to these people that followed his orders. So there now, I guess the final chapter to bring you up to date is a confusion. And within that confusion, I'm seeing a division. There are those who are going through the stages of grief and say, look, I made a mistake. This isn't what I wanted. And they may be saying, oh, the election was stolen, but I don't care as much. There is a divestment of emotional energy from that issue. So on one hand, his following is squeezed on. And on one hand, there are people kind of dropping out, maybe a third of them. And the others are hardening into a kind of a paranoid shell where they're surrounding themselves with like-minded people and listening on YouTube to paranoids that confirm their worldview. And then there are just a few in the middle. So right now, what's happened is, of course, there's a big split in the Democratic Party. I interviewed someone yesterday who said, yes, you have the country club Republicans, and then you have the populist Republicans. I'm a populist Republican. Confusion, that's the last chapter of the deep story. to bring you up to date. And what I think looking through time helps us see is that something can start one way and end up in a very different way. So we need to be mindful of these. So what's underlying this strange story? Why has it happened? There are three main narratives out there. One narrative is globalization, that from 1970 roughly on in the United States, factories moved from the US to Mexico or China, leaving devastated communities in urban and rural areas, and automation. But unions were destroyed in this, or greatly weakened in this process of offshoring too. And so there were winners and losers of globalization. California, where I live, it's the winner part of globalization. A lot of high-tech people, Silicon Valley, I'm looking at it out the window. That's kind of where the newest and best and highly paid technicians live. They're winners of globalization, actually leaders of it. But if you go to Lake Charles, Louisiana, if you go to Eastern Kentucky, those are the losers of globalization. So you have kind of Democrats where the winners are, and you have Republicans where the losers are. So that's narrative one that's out there, a great deal to it. Narrative two is that actually it's an urban-rural divide. And that what you find is the cities are attracting the investment of capital. The cities are investing highly educated people. That's where people are educated, in the cities. And rural areas find that they're where life is not. They're where people are leaving. And they're far more, and ardently so, Republican. They feel culturally colonized by the fast pace of change and self-centeredness of the urban elite. So that's narrative two. And narrative three is race. That you have why is it in the South that the South was the center, for example, of this move to the right? And why is it that in the break-in, these are all white faces? Wasn't this the rise of the Tea Party really an objection to Barack Obama, our first Black president? So the third narrative is, let's lift out race and look at the power of that. It's less spoken about, but covertly very much there. I think that actually all of these three narratives combine. They're all true, and they combine to a story of loss. Some of the communities I have looked at are facing a great loss. I'm doing interviews now in Appalachia, and in one of those communities, the coal jobs are gone. And one man I talked to yesterday, he said, the good jobs, gone. The local store I used to always go to, gone. My wife, he's on his third relationship, not living with the mother of his children, gone. Wife 1, gone. 2, gone. 3, shaky. Daily readings to his kids, gone. Even his environment is a little bit gone because it's contaminated, and the coal companies left a lot of contaminated water, streams. Nobody trusts the water. They're drinking out of bottles, out of plastic bottles. Even also in areas of high addiction, and there is an opiate crisis in the area that I'm looking at now, which is solidly Republican Trump. It's a different version of the same deep story. But if opiates come into your community, your beloved community is gone, because your uncle is stealing from your grandmother's purse, and some hollers, or that is communities, are safe and some aren't, and now you can't tell the difference. So there is tremendous loss that I think the Democratic people on the coast just aren't experiencing and aren't empathizing with. And that this loss is creating a grief. And it also creates a shame, because if you couldn't hold your family together and you're not seeing your kids, and if you can't hold down a steady job, many of the sources of pride have been removed from you. And honestly, I think we do need to give priority to an understanding of emotion. I think Donald Trump was brilliant at doing a thing that I don't think we were looking at, of de-shaming. He went through certain de-shaming rituals, I think. For the last 4 years, I think we saw it almost every other day. What would happen is this. He knew who he was talking to, who he was appealing to, and how they felt. But in the American press, you would see he would say, oh, all immigrants are criminals and stupid. And then the press, the punditry, they would say, you can't say that. That's ridiculous. Are you some idiot? How could you be our president? This is awful. They would shame him. And then that's episode 2. Episode 3, Donald Trump roars against the shamers. Well, I hate the press, the stupid press, their unpatriotic press. So what have we been witness to on almost every other daily basis? Something outrageous, shaming of the outrageous thing, and then shaming of the shamers. And I believe there was some cathartic satisfaction among the people I came to know who had suffered all these losses and felt ashamed. He was getting rid of the shame. He was just saying, look, I will attack the shamers. People are making you feel bad. They're the problem. I'm getting rid of the shame. I invite us all to explore politics at this level, because I think it's kind of what gives the steam to the populist movements we're trying to understand. One man I talked to said, oh, Donald Trump, and he had begun a caravan 8 miles long of Trump supporters waving flags and hats. He said, oh, Donald Trump, He's like lightning in a jar, lightning in a jar. Wow. So we can't just talk about politics as a set of topics. Are you pro-life, or are you, against the right to abortion? Are you for guns, against guns? Are you issue by issue? We do need to know that, but I think it's really important for us to examine the cultural and social sources of that lightning. So let me just end here by suggesting what needs to be done and our part in it. To quote our wonderful President Barack Obama, said, "You are the change you're looking for." And I think many of us in academic life, many of us who have the privilege to stand back and examine and take seriously and use the best of our brain to kind of decode, really grasp what's going on the important fronts. I think we face a big challenge, and it's important that and a good thing to step up to it. So I think that those of us who are alarmed by populism need to stand strong, but also develop empathy bridges. Now, there are some people that don't believe in empathy in the United States. They confuse it with weakness. Oh, well, you're just giving in to the other side if you understand them or empathize with them. That's a huge misunderstanding. And I think the greatest political leaders we've had, Nelson Mandela or Mahatma Gandhi, were masters of empathy. And it's a capacity every person has, but not every person has developed. And so I think we need to reach out and across this divide in useful ways, and not let these two sides harden and just be contemptuous of one another. And at every level, in the national level, the state level, informal level. There is something in the United States called the Bridge Alliance, which has some 70 or 80 small organizations which do this. I participated in one called Living Room Conversations, where you get left and right together and you break bread, you sit in the living room. I've done one right here. Actually, the people I studied for strangers in their own land are now coming to visit me. And when they do, we often have these living room conversations. So they're looking around at Berkeley at all these foreign languages and what's going on here. That's at the informal level. I'm on the board of an organization called the American Exchange Project that gets high school students in the South to visit high school students in the North, high school students on the coast to go inland to rural areas in the middle of the country. And they don't talk about politics, at least not to begin with. They just talk about what they have in common. And most recently, this organization, some of the high school students in the North read about the hurricanes that have hit Lake Charles, Louisiana, where some of the high school students in this program are, and wanted to come down and help rebuild some of the torn buildings. So that's the kind of thing we need more of. And there is an art to talking across the divide. And I've met some people quite extraordinary at it. In other words, there are bridge builders on the other side, and we need to, church leaders, education leaders, political leaders, who are good listeners. But maybe I'll end with just one example of an extraordinary leader. It's a man named General Russell Honore, and he was he's a biracial man who was considered the rescuer of the victims of Hurricane Katrina, 2005, and he's in his retirement become a passionate environmentalist. So one day I watched General Russell Honore talk to these white businessmen who, he's an environmentalist, and he's talking to these white businessmen who are all in the oil business, and their rhetorical symbols are freedom, freedom to start your own free business, freedom to get rich, freedom from onerous environmental regulations in this highly polluted area. Freedom was their symbol. But they were also loved fishing and hunting, but freedom was their symbol. So this environmentalist, I think Democrat, they're white, he's Black. And I wondered to myself, how is this man going to create an empathy bridge? How is he going to get himself listened to by the other side? And here's what he did. He said, well, I woke up this morning and I looked out at Lake Charles and I saw a man in a boat. And that man had his fishing line out and he had his bucket ready. But that man is not free to lift out an uncontaminated fish. And I thought, you genius, what you have done, you have not gone in there and said, oh, we must regulate, you're wrong to be opposing regulation. No, no, he took their symbol and did what I would call a symbol stretch. That is, they took their symbol and he pulled it over and he applied it to something they were not thinking of. And I actually saw their expressions soften and they begin to listen. And I thought we need, at the time I thought I wanted to put him on some conveyor belt around the whole country, that he would be a healing force and teach us all, but he's just one man. We have to learn that. And we have to get curious how the successful communicators do successfully communicate across this growing and hardening divide. And I think we can do it, and that this conference is helping us do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Hochschild, for your talk. I think there is a lot of, how to say, there are many issues that we can discuss. I just invite all of you, everyone, each and every one of you, to give comments, to say something or to write something in the comments. We have the chat and we have the questions and answers. So please write into the chat so that everyone can read it. At this point, I have 2 comments or questions. May I read them out loud or? Okay, so there I need my glasses. Ateli Gerhard writes, how can we sensitively approach the issue of women and people of color who identify Donald Trump as their savior? They even identify anti-racist activists and migrants as new colonists. So in the second sentence is, what amazes me is conservative black women, for example, might criticize the principle of discrimination in a legitimate pattern, but exclusively attribute these practices to the American left. So how would you respond to that?
Yes, it's a great question, a very useful question. Um, the uh, the people I'm coming to know uh, on the right get their picture of the left mediated through YouTube, but their picture also has some truth to it. I think there are problems actually on the American left. And the message that the right people I talk to are getting is that the left look down on us. They think we're prejudiced. And they think that we don't know that we're prejudiced. In other words, we have these secret sins that they do not. And that's on top of thinking we're hillbillies and rednecks. And they are ignoring our losses. And so I'm angry at them for putting us down. In other words, they see no invitation. What they do see is contempt and stereotyping of them as racist. So again, we need General Russell Honore and his magic empathic reach out. And so they feel that they don't feel seen. They feel actually a kind of an envy of Blacks. So I'm hearing two different kinds of attitudes toward race. One is the old time KKK, what they call full on racist. Oh, I don't want, my daughter to marry a Black. But that's not the main story I'm hearing. I'm hearing something else. Oh, do you notice that in the comics, they're switching out all the strong white men and putting Black women, they're the muscular ones. And have you noticed in the advertising, it's now Blacks and it's women, but where are the men? And then when you say, whites are good too, they call you a racist. Okay, so imagine yourself, do the empathic stretch, to be in a place where you feel accused of defending the kind of identity you have, even if you don't say, oh, it's good, I'm white. It's being put on you, and they do feel that the left has made a battle out of what I would call in the managed heart feeling rules about the right and wrong way to feel. And what you should feel, these right-wing people think, is, even the Blacks and even women among them, is that you should feel guilty. And there's a kind of an anti-guilt pushback. It's all in this realm of feeling rules and feelings in a curious way. So the questioner was asking about right-wing women. Why are they going along with this? My impression from my field work, is actually they vote the same way pretty much as their as men do, their partners do, their brothers and fathers do, but they don't feel as strongly about it. And that doesn't kind of show up in the polls. For example, I went into one home in Louisiana and we were talking about people on welfare. And they said, oh, there's a lot of fraud. People who receive government aid that don't deserve government aid, they lie to the welfare worker. And I asked them, well, how much fraud do you think goes on? And the husband said, oh, I think half of the people who take welfare checks lie to get them. And the wife said, oh, no. You know, I was a single mother. There was a period I needed help and was very glad to get it. And I didn't lie. No, it's more like 15, 20%. So it's in these subtle ways that you see gender differences. But it is also true that a lot of women vote with who are on the right, vote with the thinking about whether their husband could get a high-paid job. And, you know, could they stay home for a little bit to take care of the kids who aren't doing that well? And, or they were thinking of a brother who just lost his position. And they're looking at these downward floating personal lives and are looking for stabilizers to them. And they don't see the answers on the left.
Okay, there is another one. All of you can raise your hands and we put you on stage as well. But there is one question from the chat. Valentina writes, what are the boundaries that should not be crossed by a politician? What do you think about that? What are the main lines that not should be crossed?
Wow. I don't have a well thought out answer to this, but I would certainly say that one has crossed a boundary, moral boundary, certainly, to vilify and insult and in a way talk in enemy-like language about a particular racial group or religious group. When Donald Trump, for example, was dealing with one of his many the lawsuits against him, there was a judge who had, I think it was a Latino last name, and he disqualified the judge. Oh, that couldn't be a fair judge because he has Latino heritage. Well, that's beyond the bounds. It's kind of racial thinking. And quite apart from the extreme of calling for the killing of anybody, you're in a way doing a moral damage to exhibit that kind of thinking. And certainly Donald Trump went well beyond that nearly every day of those 4 years. During his campaign, he called for roughing up protesters, Black Lives Matter protesters at his at these rallies. You know, can I have a little help? Let's get those people out of there. In the old days, you could, and then it goes like this, you could really take care of them. Hey, I'll cover your legal fees if you are arrested. Our own president said this. All of this is way beyond the bounds. So any call for violence uh, any racial or religious stereotyping, all way beyond uh, the bounds, for starters.
There is another question from a fellow Californian that I would like to read to you by Hasha Ostovani. The grievances that have given rise to right-wing populism in the US, some of the some of the economic causes of which you discussed are also animated by the idea of America, that many who have not been directly affected by the economic woes of globalization themselves, thereby the appeal of Make America Great Again to this group, these are what we know as nationalists or Christian nationalists. In my own experience, these seem to be even more zealous than the members of the working class whose grievances are mainly economics and or emotional. How do you suggest approaching those country mates of ours?
These are great questions. Thank you for that one. You're right that there are many supporters of Donald Trump and this populist project who are not poor. But the real divide is education. In other words, if you look at those without a 4-year degree, this wasn't true 30 years ago, but now education cuts like a knife between those whose chances are falling and those whose chances are rising. So among Christian nationalists are many who are well-to-do, but who do not have 4-year degrees. And they are what I would call the elite of the left behind. And that's curious. So we're not talking about abject poor as the populists, but as those who imagine that they once had something that they've lost. There's a big difference between not having something, story of deprivation, and the story of imagining you had something or actually having something and lost it, losing it. Those are, we know from Kahneman's work and other psychologists, that there's really a big difference. And it's these people who feel they have lost something who become the most agonized, the most distressed. And I think, again, that the Christian, the Christian right, however affluent, are part of that elite and do feel a loss. And they've been, look at what the Christian right believes. There is something about the rapture. This may be unfamiliar to Europeans, but in the evangelical Christian tradition, there actually was a whole series of best-selling books called The Left Behind. The Left Behind. And the belief is that before you die, actually something bad's going to happen. It's going to be a cataclysm, and society will the environmental disasters, hurricanes, and destruction of life as we know it. But at this moment, the good people, the Christians, will be lifted up, that gravity will leave their feet and they will rise up and those who have not been Christians will burn in hell. This is the rapture. And I think it's all a metaphor in a way for what has already happened. It's not something that's going to happen, that's the belief, but for the white, blue collar class, actually, their world has come to an end. That world has gone. And in fact, the divide is not just between the good and the bad, but between the rich and the poor. Not to be overly materialist, I do think that they were coping with something real, and that the rapture speaks to them. And if I study invite you to Google images of the rapture, and you look at the people in the rapture that are going up to heaven, they have high-heeled shoes on, they're svelte, they look like they're going to a cocktail party. It does kind of look like social class. They don't show pictures of people going down below, but one can imagine. So I invite us to bring a sociological perspective to what look like, to many of us who are not national Christians, right-wing Christians, that metaphor is important. And look at how people are coping with their real circumstances and what ideas make sense to them given those circumstances. Crazy as they are, at the last page of Strangers in Their Own Land, I'm saying goodbye to a wonderful couple who had suffered terribly. They lived between these giant petrochemical plants, and everything was polluted. The garden, they couldn't grow vegetables, they couldn't swim in the bayou. It was, everybody they knew had died of cancer except them. And they had suffered terribly. And we're voting Republican for Donald Trump. Suffered terribly from deregulation of contaminating industries. Anyway, and they were a lovely couple. I really became and am still in touch with them. Anyway, at the very end, the man, Mr. Areno, kind of conducted me to my car and just leaned out to the window and said, "Look, I don't know when I'm going to see you again." Only the angel Gabriel, he was one of these Christian, like evangelical Christian, only the angel Gabriel knows when our time comes. But when it does come, I know I'll see you up there. He's telling me I've been a good person, and he feels I'm helping by writing this book. And then he said, and his whole community, all the cypress trees had been destroyed by the EDC that was in the water, ethylene dichloride. And he said, but up in heaven after the rapture, they say there are beautiful trees up there. And honestly, I drove home after that departure with such a confusion of feeling. I felt I really love these people. I get the depths of their hopelessness. I too might turn to religion. It's not crazy in an emotional sense. Had they gone slightly mad? Yes, in my view. Would I have gone slightly mad in their circumstances? Yes. I think that's where I'd go with it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Are you ready to take some questions from the audience? Because And I know there is also great questions in the chat, but I would like to ask Georgia if you want to.
Yeah.
Okay, jump in here. There we go.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much for your talk. And I would have many questions, but there is one question that I would really like to, where I would like to hear your opinion. And the question is about your evaluation of the relationship between political polarization and citizens polarization. Because you mentioned the fact that polarization grew with, of course, with the Tea Party. And I was wondering whether there is a linkage between political polarization and the polarization that is visible among citizens. And this brings me to the question that has been raised before about the limits of what politicians should and can say, and what citizens can say to each other. And this is very visible in the social media. This relationship between political polarization and citizens polarization is the point that affects not only the USA, of course, but also our European societies. Thank you.
Yeah, very good, very good. There is, you're right, both at the political level and the everyday level. I hear about Facebook deletions, you know, or somebody blocked me because I said something, or I blocked someone because they said something. So there's electronic, in a way, personal citizenship polarization, church going. There, one church, Pentecostal evangelical church, I went to a lot, and I noticed that about a quarter of the worshipers in this church right there in Lake Charles, Louisiana, were Black. And I thought, how wonderful. This is great. Everybody's saying this is a center of segregation and racism, but look at this. And but after Donald Trump came to power, fewer and fewer Blacks attended this church and moved rather back to their Black churches. So things are happening at that level. And that is why this organization called the Bridge Alliance feels important to me. It is a citizen to citizen kind of movement. And it doesn't have leaders. It's all volunteer, and it's hugely important. In the United States, we used to have two important institutions that mixed and matched people across regions and social classes. And one was the compulsory military draft, which took people from all over, of every class and every region, men, and mixed them together. They got to know each other and like each other. And that is no longer with us today. So that mixer and matcher is gone. We used to also have very vibrant labor union movement in this country. Something like 20 to 30% used to be in 1970 members of labor unions. Now that's down to less than 9% for in the private sector. I think it's 11 or 12 in public sector jobs. Really not a factor. And labor unions used to be the main connector between workers and the Democratic Party. And they don't function that way. And there has been no new substitute for that. So we're trying to scratch around. Now, I don't think the Bridge Alliance and these really do-good organizations are a full filler for labor unions, but we need to put that top of the agenda. What is going to fill that slot? To create good dialogue at the citizenship level. At the moment, I think schools need to teach mediation, the skills of this General Russell Honore, this imaginative symbol stretcher, all the different methods of talking across the aisle should be part of a civic culture that children as citizens learn to do, and learn to appreciate the value of empathy, not put it down. Oh, those people are impossible. Oh, they're right. They're so stupid. Look, they believe in the rapture. They believe lies. They're liars themselves. All of that contempt is a problem on the left. Let me just say this, because I didn't realize it before I went around and gave a lot of talks on strangers in their own land in this country. And what I found is that when I talk to right-wing groups, like Louisiana State University, I actually got a little scared. Oh, I've said many negative things about this part of the country. They may not like me. That's okay. I was bracing. They loved the book. They said, you're not telling us anything new. We knew we had these problems. They were the children of the operators in these petrochemical plants. We've got a lot to do. Thank you for coming. Thank you for getting to know us. When I went to the left, to Pomona College, one very elite, very expensive here on the California coast, I thought, oh, piece of cake, I don't have to prepare anything. Not at all. They took offense at the book. I thought, whoa, you mean you want us to talk to those racists out there? And I thought, oh, dear, 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 what's happening? I think of as my side. And what I think is happening is that a lot of people during this tenure of Donald Trump have been traumatized, especially, first generation students who's, struggled hard, financial sacrifices made, women and blacks thinking, oh no, now we have a loss story that we have to contain and feel sad about. And so that the left has kind of turned, it's a lot of goodwill, wonderful goodwill, turned in on itself, into its little bubble, and turned into a self-monitoring project. Oh, you're right, you're wrong, this is what you should feel, that's not that. Because it's frightened of crossing the empathy bridge to the other side. And we have to gently address that one too.
Okay, thank you. Nikki, you're next if we're taking questions here from the audience before we attend to the chat again.
Okay, so first, thank you for your very inspiring talk. I just wondered, because I saw this documentary on 100 days of Biden, so to say, and there was this couple also from a rural area where there was a lot of industry, and they actually on first glance kind of benefited from that was also still in the pandemic. They benefited from Biden's kind of support system. They got money and everything, but the husband, he was like, yeah, but I don't want that. I want to be able to, sustain myself and everything. So I think that is kind of linked to the whole pride and empathy kind of thing. And I wondered if there has to be, or if there needs to be a major shift in this kind of pride discourse, which is kind of, from my point of view, linked to kind of this individualism and this freedom and this kind of self-empowerment, that kind of, all of these things don't necessarily lead to like a successful story as a society. So I was thinking, do people have to kind of, do we have to reconceptualize these kind of ideas that are kind of rooted in American society, I think, to be able to actually communicate with each other on this kind of level?
That's a marvelous comment. And I I think it goes right to a main point. And I watched Biden give a talk in Lake Charles, the very center of my research for those 5 years, with the I-10 bridge behind him, which is a very wavery bridge. People pray to God when they get on ramp, because the whole thing is set on ethylene dichloride, which kind of actually makes the surface it's on spongy. It's not discussed, but this is true. And one reason that it's a critical bridge. Anyway, there is Biden offering jobs to these Republicans that voted for Donald Trump. And you're quite right. He, well, I don't know how they're responding, but I think you're right that they are partly rejecting Biden's message. Biden's message was great on the economic front. He said, jobs, 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 good jobs, lasting jobs, jobs fixing what's broke, jobs building what we don't have. It's a new deal. We've got to do it. Now's the time. It's not deficit spending. You know, we're just taxing the millionaires, the billionaires. They can still have their second houses, he said. They can still have their private planes. I'm not taking that away. But they're at the, top 5% of the 1%. Yeah, they can help fund this stuff we all need. He made a brilliant economic pitch. He's not a great speaker, but he made a good economic pitch. But what was missing was what you just said, was kind of speak to the cultural story. He didn't want to touch that. I understand, but he does need to. And we need to help him. We researchers, we people, figure out how to speak to the pride and the individualism, how to do some kinds of symbol stretches, as General Russell Honoré did, that you can keep your freedom, you can keep your individualism, but there are things eroding your capacity to be an individual and feel proud, and we need to fix those. And maybe there were ways this could be said. So maybe we take one more, but we're a little perhaps over time. So.
Oh, I think we're still doing fine. Can you handle two more questions or so?
Okay, yeah, that'd be good.
Okay, good. Lupo, do you want to read the next questions, or should I go ahead?
You go.
Okay, so I'll just proceed here. Looking at the chat here, here's one that brings us back to Christian ideology. To what extent do you believe religious thinking, specifically Christian ideology, plays a role in the growing political or cultural divide? What communication strategies would you recommend for building bridges? For building social capital across the divide with respect to religious and non-religious identities?
Well, some of that question I think we've handled in a previous question. I would add one more point about how to bridge the left-right divide as it impacts evangelical Christians with an example. Many on the right, including evangelical Christians, don't believe in climate change, don't believe the science that tells us that there's a blanket around the earth that's holding the heat in and causing erratic weather. They don't believe it. But so how do we handle it? Do we just go and say, look, I'm educated, I have a PhD in in climate science and I tell you you're wrong, and no. You go to Christian Scientists, you take credible, who do they consider credible communicators? And there is a climate scientist in Texas who is married to an evangelical minister, Catherine Hayhoe, and she gives talks. Look, my Christ is your Christ. He built this earth. It's our job to preserve it. This is his mission for us. And there is climate change. We need to do something. When she says it, when they're listening to her and they're listening to her husband, whom she's convinced, they hear it. So I think, for example, taking credible communicators, that idea, not only do you learn to work with their symbols, but you learn to work with their authorities. I talked to many blue-collar pipe fitters who didn't believe in climate change, and although the Louisiana coast is receding just week by week, they didn't think that was caused by anything special. And so I thought, how would you convince a pipe fitter in Louisiana of this? They work for these large foreign-based companies that, of course, take their profits outside Louisiana. Louisiana is like a third world country. And Sasol, for example, or Exxon, Mobil, these big companies. But if you ask the CEO of Sasol and the CEO of Exxon, they say, yes, of course there's climate change. That's why we're diversifying our portfolio. So, and if you read, it's actually online, what the company view on a climate is, there it is. So if you're going to have a conversation with a group of blue-collar workers for Sasol and Exxon in Lake Charles, you would want to say, yeah, okay, well, your boss, the boss you look up to, the boss you'd like to be like, you'd like a car like he has, you'd like to live where he does. He's the guy you look up to. He's a Republican like you. He believes in climate change. So this is a way of talking across. It's one in a bag of tricks. You get who they have faith in and get them to talk.
Thank you. Are you ready to take one more question from the audience? Great. Mark Oliver, would you like to pose your question yourself? And I know you also have something in the chat, but I think you should.
Yeah.
Great.
I wasn't sure if it went through.
Go ahead.
Thank you for your talk, Professor Hochschild. All of the hardships you mentioned, poverty, addiction, cultural and educational exclusion, are hardships that also, if not more so, affect people who are not white and who, on top of those hardships, also face racism and often have good reason to fear for their lives daily. I mean, George Floyd wasn't yet a year ago. Now, when you're asking for empathy with Trump supporters, isn't it a privilege to even be able to extend this empathy without having to fear for your own life? And isn't this, to stay with the theme of empathy perhaps, isn't this simply asking too much of Black people and people of color, for instance, considering the prevailing social power differentials they are subject to? Thank you.
Not everybody has to be on the front lines of this empathy project. And I fully understand what you're saying and come from exactly the same vantage point. But I think if it's true that nearly half, 86.9% of American voters voted for Donald Trump, it's the stone in the road. I don't think you can avoid it. It would be nice. And if it were just 10%, 15%, okay, we could handle it without having to make a big project of bringing them along in a way. I think it's too big. I worry about a backfire. I worry about things getting worse. So in addition to moving ahead on very important racial frontier, I think we have an extra job of getting more people with us, getting the other half of this country on board.
Great, excellent. I'm not quite sure what to do at this moment because we have a couple of questions in the chat, but they kind of get us into either the fake news debate. I don't know if you want to, try and handle that, or they also get us into the education debate again. So can I pose one more question, maybe? May I do that?
Okay, and then because I do have another Zoom.
Okay, I see. So last question here, let's take the one that I see in front of me. Do you think Trump has actually pushed the boundaries of what is sayable in the long term? Do you think his way of bringing up identity categories in his speeches has normalized, so to speak, certain patterns of speech that before his presidency were thinkable but not sayable? And what is the impact of a figure like him speaking politically incorrect on what is sayable in a society?
Yeah. Certainly, he has, through his shaming rituals, daily transgressed American norms of civility, daily. And is this permanent? Is there a new normal? Are we now going to all do this to each other? No, I don't think so. I think if the realm of feeling rules it can move back and forth just the way politics does. In fact, they do go together. And that we can reestablish that. I think Joe Biden in his strategy perhaps of just avoidance and getting on to repairs and good news, he's a little bit avoidant, and I understand why, but I think as in previous conversations we had in this session, we do need to address it more directly. But so I don't think we're stuck there. That would be my answer. But let me just give you one snippet from an interview I recently did. All these by Zoom. By the way, this is possible to do Zoom research. I didn't realize that until this last year, but it's actually amazing. One man told me, he lives in Louisville, Kentucky. He said, I partly don't know what's real. If I'm on, so kind of what the norms of civility are, what the feeling rules are, I don't know what they are. He felt a sense of anomie. On the one hand, he said, going on Facebook, he saw people insulting each other, highly kind of charged rhetoric. People are unfriending each other. He said that was very hostile. And then he and his wife went to look at the horse races, a very big thing in Louisville, just from the outside. But in the parking lot, there were actually African-American, don't fuck with me, excuse my language, but, all armed. And that's a group with that name and ready for combat. And his wife got back in the car and went back home. They're frightened. Didn't want to get into any melee. So Facebook was one reality. What he saw that horse races was another reality, he said. And then I went to the grocery store, and the grocer said, good morning, and hi, oh, excuse me, I bumped into you in the aisle. Perfect civility and friendliness. He said, and so is that the reality? It's like people live in these fractured realms and don't know quite which one to prioritize, except he went for the grocery store. So we need to actually normalize relationships between these various realms in some way. I'm not sure I've got an answer on how to do that.
Well, thank you so much. We'll let you off the hook now. I do apologize. Once again, thank you so much. This is what Zoom can do. We zoomed you right into our classroom and right into the heart of Europe. And it is at this point, where I, again, want to thank you for your, first of all, prompt answer when we invited you, and, now your wonderful and inspiring talk. So please do come back at some point. And I want to thank the audience here as well. Thanks everyone for joining us tonight. And here it's evening where you are. It's in the morning, right? So have a wonderful day. And yes, you will hear from us, of course. We'll be in touch. We'll send you an email with all the details to follow. And next week, if I give you a sneak peek of what's ahead, we'll have a talk by Paula Diehl, which will be in German, right? We also mix languages here. So we have all three languages, English, German, and French, in this also very, very heterogeneous lecture series here. But once again, it's been a great honor for us to have you here among us. So thank you very much.
And thank you for the wonderful work you do. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. So